In the winter of 1903, Dr. Helena Scarlet claimed she could hear the final whisper of every patient who died under her care at Scarlet Pines Sanitarium. What she heard in those last moments would haunt investigators for decades, not because of supernatural implications, but because of what those whispers revealed about the true nature of mercy in the Colorado mountains. Before we delve into the disturbing truth behind Dr. Scarlet's claims, if you're drawn to stories that blur the line between compassion and corruption, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the darkest mysteries from America's forgotten past. And tell us in the comments, what city and country are you listening from? We love connecting with our international audience who appreciates these haunting tales. Now, let's uncover what really happened in those isolated mountain halls. According to fragmented medical records and testimonies passed down through local families, the events at Scarlet Pines began during one of Colorado's harshest winters on record. The year 1903 found the Colorado Territory still grappling with the aftermath of the silver crash a decade prior. Towns that had once thrived on mining wealth now struggled to reinvent themselves, and medical facilities like Scarlet Pines Sanitarium represented both hope and desperation for families dealing with the tuberculosis epidemic that swept through the mountain communities. Nestled at an elevation of 7,800 feet in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, approximately 30 miles southwest of Pueblo, the Scarlet Pines Sanitarium had been established in 1898 by a consortium of Denver physicians who believed the thin, dry mountain air would prove beneficial for consumptive patients. The facility, a sprawling three-story wooden structure painted in muted greens to blend with the surrounding pine forest, could accommodate up to 60 patients during its peak operation. Dr. Helena Scarlet arrived at the sanitarium in the autumn of 1902, one of only 3 physicians willing to work in such remote conditions. At 34, she possessed impeccable credentials from the University of Michigan Medical School, one of the few institutions that admitted women at the time. Her colleagues described her as methodical, compassionate, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to comfort patients in their final hours. The sanitarium's patient population consisted primarily of middle-class individuals whose families could afford the monthly fee of $45, a substantial sum equivalent to a skilled worker's monthly wage. Many came from Denver's growing business community, sent away not only for treatment, but to prevent the spread of infection within their households. By January 1903, a combination of harsh weather, supply shortages, and staff departures had reduced the facility's operation to skeletal levels. Dr. Scarlet found herself the sole remaining physician, assisted only by 2 nurses and a handful of orderlies who lived in the staff quarters adjacent to the main building. The isolation was profound. The nearest telegraph office lay 23 miles away in the mining town of Beulah, accessible only by treacherous mountain roads that became impassable during winter storms. The transformation in Dr. Scarlet's demeanor began during the second week of February 1903, following the death of Mrs. Catherine Thornfield, a Denver banker's wife who had been at the facility for 7 months. Nurse Margaret O'Brien, one of the 2 remaining staff members, later testified that she found Dr. Scarlet kneeling beside Mrs. Thornfield's bed at approximately 3:17 a.m., her ear pressed close to the deceased woman's lips. "Doctor, she's been gone for nearly an hour," Nurse O'Brien reported, saying, "I checked her pulse myself before calling you." Dr. Scarlet's response would later prove significant. "She's still speaking, Margaret. They all speak at the end. You simply have to know how to listen." Over the following weeks, Nurse O'Brien observed Dr. Scarlet spending increasing amounts of time with patients during their final hours. The physician began requesting that all terminal patients be moved to room 17, a corner chamber on the second floor that she claimed provided optimal acoustics for what she termed final communications. The room itself was unremarkable. 12 by 14 feet, with a single window facing west toward the Continental Divide. Dr. Scarlet had arranged the furniture in a specific configuration. The bed positioned 3 feet from the window, a wooden chair placed precisely 18 inches from the head of the bed, and a small writing desk where she meticulously recorded what she claimed to hear from dying patients. By March, the pattern had become unmistakable. Patients would be transferred to room 17 when Dr. Scarlet determined their condition had become terminal. Within 24 to 48 hours, they would expire, invariably during the early morning hours between 2 and 4 a.m. Dr. Scarlet would then spend anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour sitting beside the body, occasionally nodding as if in conversation. The first indication that something was amiss came from Thomas Müller, a German immigrant whose brother Heinrich was being treated for advanced pulmonary tuberculosis. Thomas had made the difficult journey from Denver to visit his brother on March 15th, only to discover that Heinrich had been transferred to room 17 the previous evening and died that morning. "My brother was weak, yes, but he was not dying," Thomas would later tell investigators. "He spoke to me coherently just 3 days before. He told me he felt stronger, that the mountain air was helping his cough. How does a man go from improvement to death in 72 hours? The deaths at Scarlet Pines followed a pattern that became increasingly apparent as spring arrived in the Colorado mountains. Dr. Scarlet's patient mortality rate had reached an unprecedented 93%, a statistic that seemed to defy medical logic, even considering the advanced stages of tuberculosis among many residents. What troubled the few remaining staff members was not merely the frequency of deaths, but the specific circumstances surrounding each passing. Patients who had shown signs of improvement would suddenly take dramatic turns for the worse after being transferred to room 17. More disturbing still were Dr. Scarlet's detailed notes about her conversations with the deceased. In her medical journal, discovered months later, she had recorded elaborate descriptions of these final whispers. According to her entries, dying patients revealed family secrets, confessed to moral failings, and provided detailed instructions about their estates and personal affairs. The specificity of these accounts suggested either remarkable coincidence or access to information that should have been impossible for Dr. Scarlet to obtain. Nurse Sarah Whitman, who had joined the staff in April 1903, became the first to openly question Dr. Scarlet's methods. During a staff meeting on April 22nd, she raised concerns about the morphine usage records, which showed consumption levels far exceeding typical palliative care requirements. "In my experience at Presbyterian Hospital in Denver," Nurse Whitman stated, "we used perhaps 1/10 the morphine Dr. Scarlet administers here, even for our most severe cases." Dr. Scarlet's response was swift and defensive. "The patients here arrive in advanced stages of suffering. My primary obligation is to ensure their comfort during transition. The mountain environment requires adjusted dosages. The altitude affects drug metabolism in ways that city physicians cannot comprehend." The explanation satisfied few. Orderly James Patterson, who had worked at the Sanitarium since its opening, began keeping his own informal records of patient conditions and medication schedules. His observations, preserved in a leather-bound notebook discovered decades later, painted a disturbing picture of systematic over-medication occurring primarily during night shifts, when only Dr. Scarlet and minimal staff were present. The turning point came with the arrival of Mrs. Elizabeth Carmichael, wife of a prominent Colorado Springs attorney. Unlike previous patients, Mrs. Carmichael's condition had been documented extensively by multiple Denver physicians before her transfer to Scarlet Pines. Her case file indicated moderate tuberculosis, with a prognosis suggesting at least 6 months to 2 years of potential survival with proper care. Mrs. Carmichael arrived on May 3, 1903, accompanied by her personal nurse, Miss Dorothy Hayes, whom the family had insisted remain at the sanitarium. This arrangement proved crucial, as Miss Hayes maintained detailed hourly records of her patient's condition and treatment, records that would later provide investigators with their first clear evidence of medical irregularities. The presence of Miss Hayes at Scarlet Pines created an unprecedented level of scrutiny that Dr. Scarlet had not previously encountered. Unlike the sanitarium's overworked staff, Miss Hayes had been specifically hired to monitor Mrs. Carmichael's care around the clock, and her nursing education from Johns Hopkins Hospital had trained her to recognize medical anomalies. On May 8th, Miss Hayes documented a concerning observation. Mrs. Carmichael had been transferred to room 17 despite showing marked improvement in her respiratory function and appetite. When Miss Hayes questioned the transfer, Dr. Scarlet cited specialized equipment in the room that would better monitor the patient's condition. However, Miss Hayes noted that room 17 contained no medical equipment that was not available in other patient rooms. More troubling was Dr. Scarlet's insistence that all medication administration occur during night rounds, typically between midnight and 3 a.m. Miss Hayes, accustomed to more conventional scheduling, requested clarification about this unusual protocol. The mountain atmosphere creates unique metabolic conditions, Dr. Scarlet explained. Medication absorption rates fluctuate dramatically with altitude and atmospheric pressure changes. Night administration, when these factors stabilize, ensures optimal therapeutic effect. Miss Hayes found this explanation medically questionable, but had little choice but to comply with the sanitarium's established procedures. However, she began documenting every medication administration with precise timing and dosage notes, creating a record that would prove invaluable to subsequent investigations. On the night of May 11th, Miss Hayes observed Dr. Scarlet preparing an injection for Mrs. Carmichael that appeared significantly larger than previous doses. When questioned, Dr. Scarlet became visibly agitated and ordered Miss Hayes to step outside while she administered the medication. Patient confidentiality requires private consultation during critical treatment phases, Dr. Scarlet stated, effectively barring the private nurse from witnessing the injection. Miss Hayes complied, but remained outside room 17, where she could hear Dr. Scarlet speaking in low tones to Mrs. Carmichael for approximately 20 minutes. What she overheard would later prove crucial to understanding Dr. Scarlet's true methods. "You understand the burden you've placed on your family," Dr. Scarlet's voice carried through the thin door. "The expenses, the emotional strain, the risk to your children's health. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go." Mrs. Carmichael's response was barely audible. "But I feel stronger today, doctor. The cough has improved considerably." "Physical symptoms can be deceiving," Dr. Scarlet replied. "The disease has progressed beyond recovery. What you're experiencing is a temporary rally, the body's final effort before inevitable decline. It's cruel to allow false hope to persist." Miss Hayes documented this conversation verbatim in her nursing notes, along with her observation that Mrs. Carmichael had indeed shown consistent improvement over the previous 4 days, with decreased fever, improved appetite, and reduced coughing episodes. The following morning, Mrs. Carmichael was found deceased at 3:45 a.m. Dr. Scarlet claimed the death occurred naturally during sleep, but Miss Hayes noted that rigor mortis suggested death had occurred several hours earlier than reported. More significantly, Mrs. Carmichael's facial expression and body positioning indicated distress rather than the peaceful passing typically associated with natural tuberculosis mortality. The death of Mrs. Carmichael triggered the first formal inquiry into conditions at Scarlet Pines Sanitarium. Attorney Robert Carmichael, devastated by his wife's unexpected death, hired Denver investigator Charles Morrison to examine the circumstances surrounding the case. Morrison's background as a former police detective and his familiarity with medical fraud cases made him uniquely qualified to recognize patterns that medical professionals might overlook. Morrison arrived at the sanitarium on May 20th, 1903, under the pretense of evaluating the facility for a potential patient. His initial observations revealed several concerning elements. The isolation of room 17, the unusual concentration of deaths in that specific location, and Dr. Scarlet's defensive responses to routine questions about patient care protocols. During his 3-day visit, Morrison interviewed staff members individually, often during meal breaks or shift changes when Dr. Scarlet was occupied with patient rounds. The picture that emerged from these conversations painted a disturbing pattern of medical irregularities that had intensified over the previous 4 months. Orderly Patterson revealed that morphine supplies required constant replenishment, despite the sanitarium's relatively small patient population. Nurse O'Brien described Dr. Scarlet's increasing obsession with patient death experiences and her claim that dying individuals revealed important family information through final whispers. Most significantly, Morrison discovered that Dr. Scarlet had been corresponding extensively with family members of deceased patients, often providing detailed accounts of their loved ones' final words and supposed deathbed confessions. These communications, preserved in the sanitarium's correspondence files, contained remarkably specific information about family financial situations, inheritance disputes, and personal secrets. The breakthrough in Morrison's investigation came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Clara Hoffman, whose husband Wilhelm had died at Scarlet Pines in March. Mrs. Hoffman contacted Morrison after learning about his inquiry, revealing that Dr. Scarlet had approached her family with detailed knowledge of Wilhelm's business affairs and outstanding debts. She knew things that Wilhelm never would have told anyone, Mrs. Hoffman explained. Details about his partnership agreements, the location of hidden assets, even private conversations between Wilhelm and his brother about changing his will. She claimed Wilhelm had whispered these things to her as he died, but Wilhelm had been unconscious for his final 2 days at the sanitarium. Morrison's investigation revealed that Dr. Scarlet had been conducting extensive correspondence with patient families both before and after deaths occurred. Her letters often contained subtle suggestions about the financial and emotional burdens of prolonged illness, coupled with assurances that she could provide merciful conclusion to suffering. The most damning evidence emerged when Morrison examined the sanitarium's financial records. He discovered that Dr. Scarlet had been receiving substantial private payments from families, amounts far exceeding normal medical fees. These payments, disguised as special care donations, ranged from $200 to $800 per case, representing significant sums for the era. Cross-referencing these payments with patient mortality records revealed an unmistakable correlation. Patients whose families had made substantial donations died within days of payment receipt, regardless of their actual medical condition. As Morrison prepared to present his findings to Colorado territorial authorities, he made one final chilling discovery. In Dr. Scarlet's private quarters, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, he found a collection of detailed patient files containing information that could only have been obtained through systematic investigation of family finances, business relationships, and inheritance arrangements. On June 2, 1903, Colorado Territorial Marshal William Barnes arrived at Scarlet Pines Sanitarium with a warrant for Dr. Helena Scarlet's arrest on charges of murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. The confrontation that followed would reveal the full scope of the operation that had been masquerading as medical care in the isolated mountain facility. Dr. Scarlet initially maintained her innocence, claiming that her methods represented advanced palliative care techniques developed specifically for high-altitude treatment of terminal tuberculosis. However, when presented with Morrison's evidence, the financial records, correspondence files, and documented patterns of suspicious deaths, her composure began to fracture. The breakthrough came when Marshall Barnes questioned her about the final whispers she claimed to hear from dying patients. Under pressure, Dr. Scarlet's explanation became increasingly contradictory and desperate. "The dying speak truths they cannot voice while living," she insisted. "The proximity to death removes inhibitions and social constraints. They reveal family secrets because they no longer fear earthly consequences." When pressed about the remarkable specificity of information she had obtained, details about bank accounts, business partnerships, and legal documents, Dr. Scarlet's story collapsed entirely. "I researched the families thoroughly before patients arrived," she finally admitted. "I wrote to business associates, examined public records, even hired investigators in Denver and Colorado Springs. The families needed to understand that prolonged illness would drain their resources and destroy their futures." The full scope of her operation emerged during subsequent interrogation. Dr. Scarlet had developed a sophisticated system for identifying wealthy families with terminally ill members. She would approach them with detailed proposals outlining the financial and emotional costs of extended treatment, then offer compassionate conclusion services for substantial fees. Her method was coldly calculated. She would provide enough genuine medical care to maintain credibility, then gradually increase morphine dosages while suggesting to families that their loved ones were suffering needlessly. The final whispers were elaborate fabrications designed to provide families with closure while justifying her actions as merciful intervention. The morphine overdoses were administered during carefully planned night rounds when minimal staff were present. Dr. Scarlet would then create detailed fictional accounts of patients' final words, incorporating the private information she had researched about family circumstances to make the stories convincing and emotionally satisfying for grieving relatives. "I convinced myself I was providing mercy," she told investigators, "but the truth is, I was providing convenience. Families wanted their burdens removed, and I gave them medical justification for their relief." The investigation revealed that over the course of 8 months, Dr. Scarlet had systematically murdered at least 23 patients whose families had paid for special care. The total amount received in fraudulent payments exceeded $12,000, equivalent to nearly $400,000 in modern currency. Dr. Helena Scarlet was tried for murder in the Colorado Territorial Court during the autumn of 1903. The trial attracted national attention as one of the first cases involving systematic medical murder motivated by financial gain rather than personal grudges or psychological compulsion. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditated murder disguised as medical treatment. Testimony from surviving staff members, financial records, and the detailed documentation maintained by Miss Hayes created an irrefutable picture of calculated killing for profit. Dr. Scarlet's defense attempted to argue that she had genuinely believed she was providing merciful relief to suffering patients, but this argument collapsed when prosecutors demonstrated the extensive research and planning that had preceded each death. The fictional final whispers were revealed as elaborate psychological manipulations designed to provide families with emotional justification for their complicity in the killings. On November 15, 1903, Dr. Helena Scarlet was convicted on 23 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in the Colorado State Penitentiary. She served 18 years before dying of pneumonia in 1921, never again practicing medicine. The Scarlet Pines Sanitarium was permanently closed following the trial. The building stood empty for 3 decades before being demolished in 1936. The site remains undeveloped, marked only by a small historical plaque commemorating the tuberculosis patients who died there, both those who succumbed naturally to disease and those who were murdered by the physician they trusted with their care. The case established important precedents for medical oversight and patient protection that influenced healthcare regulation throughout the American West. More significantly, it revealed how isolation, desperation, and financial pressure could corrupt even those sworn to preserve life. The final whispers that Dr. Scarlet claimed to hear were ultimately revealed as projections of her own guilt and rationalizations for inexcusable actions. Her ability to convince grieving families that murder was mercy demonstrated the dangerous power of medical authority when exercised without proper oversight or ethical constraint. In the end, the only whispers heard at Scarlet Pines were those of conscience, a voice that Dr. Helena Scarlet had systematically learned to ignore in pursuit of profit disguised as compassion. This case reminds us that the greatest horrors often hide behind facades of respectability and care. What do you think drove Dr. Scarlet to cross the line from healer to killer? Was it purely greed or something darker? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as chilling as we did, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more dark tales from America's hidden past. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most dangerous people are those we trust most completely.